Well, let's come together then. And what we were talking about this morning is, of course, freedom. This is the 4th of July weekend, and our country is celebrating its Declaration of Independence. And we're going to talk a little bit today about what freedom is. We're going to talk about freedom and bondage and suffering. If you have a copy of the textbook and you want to follow up on this during the week, you can take a look at Dr. Holmes' chapter titled Man Recreates the Universe. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Declaration of Independence in both a collective manner, that is, we as a country, in an individual manner, as I, as a spiritual being, responsible for making choices in my life. We're actually going to look a little bit at the Declaration of Independence as a prayer, as a spiritual mind treatment, where the founding fathers put their intention into the law. And it is still unfolding, the demonstration, as we speak. So let's look a little bit about these ideas about freedom and about bondage and about suffering and our human experience. And what is our divine nature? What is our spiritual nature? And what is the true nature of what God is as us? And then what is our human experience? And why does it appear that there may be a difference between the two? And how do we change things, if you will? If we are having an experience of limitation in any area of our lives, how do we change that? How do we make our declaration to have a different experience? How do we cooperate with the power of the universe that responds to us according to our belief? So the first thing Dr. Holmes asks us to consider is the macrocosm and the microcosm, the big picture and the little picture. And if we look at the big picture, which is all that there is, and remember, we are a part of all that there is. We are not separated from or different than all that there is, but we are a part of it. And that's most important, that we really get that understanding intellectually, but the feeling emotionally, that we belong. See, we're not accidents of creation. We belong. We are here for a reason or reasons. We are here for purpose. The divine created us out of itself for a reason. But it created us, we are told, in its own image and its own likeness. And what that means is that we are of its nature. Dr. Holmes tells us that the effect must always take on the nature of the cause. And the divine is the cause, and you and I are the effect. We are a part of the divine that is discovering itself anew as you and as I. It is the very love of God within that beats our heart. It is the very wisdom of God within that runs our bodies, that controls the division of cells and the creation of bones, the replacement of tissues. Frederick Bales asks us to consider, if we had experienced some type of an injury and we lost blood, if we of our own had to figure out how much water to drink and how much salt to take so that our bodies would be able to reproduce and replace the chemicals that it had lost, we wouldn't know how to do it. But there's a wisdom within us that knows, and it guides us naturally and easily through natural desires of thirst and hunger. And it leads us to participate in drinking water and eating salty foods and doing whatever it is that may be appropriate for the restoration of perfect health within us. That wisdom is right here within us. We are part of it. And if we contemplate the divine nature, we understand that in the absolute, in the divine, that it is perfect freedom. There's a part of the divine that acts as law. When when the choosing, thinking, willing part of God that we call spirit, or sometimes Father, when it decides what it will have, when it speaks its word in biblical terms, when it says, let there be, there is another part of the divine, but it is part of the divine itself. It is not separate then or apart from. It is just another part of it. We describe it in three parts because it makes it easier for us to understand. But in truth, it is only one. So it's part of the divine and decides what it will have, and immediately part of the divine makes it so, acts upon it, begins the unfoldment. And in this way of thinking, Dr. Holmes tells us that the thought, or the declaration, if you want to call it that, is the involution. And then the process of that invisible thought taking tangible form and becoming the very thing that it was directed to do, that is the evolution. So in the terms of Genesis in the Bible, we're told that God said, let there be planets. And there were planets. And we know from studying science that process of there being planets took a very long time. It was the unfoldment. And what we want to consider is that even while the process was unfolding, it was complete. It was done in the mind of God. Maybe the best way I can explain it is if you take an acorn in your hand and you go stand next to an oak tree, you have the same thing next to you as you have in your hand. The acorn is an oak tree, but it is an oak tree in the form of an acorn. It is an oak tree at a different point in the life cycle of an oak tree. And even as the planets were taking form, even as the energy of the universe was becoming matter and the matter was taking form, it's all perfect. It is all complete in the mind of God. It is not like God is sitting around waiting for the planets to become. They are becoming. They are planets in the stage of becoming. So in the divine mind, in the absolute, what I'm trying to get to here is that in the absolute, what God knows, God is. It becomes. There's a power in the universe that responds to us exactly according to our belief. Now Holmes tells us that belief is a knowing so certain that no possibility to the opposite could enter our mind. If we switch back to the absolute, which is where we come from, the reason that law responds to us is because that is the image and likeness into which we were born. That is the very nature of God. And we can do something that God cannot. God cannot doubt. God cannot think, well, maybe, perhaps. God cannot have a dream-like experience as we can. For whatever the divine thinks becomes, it is. Whereas you and I can daydream, we can postulate in our minds, we can think, well, maybe I'll do this and maybe I'll do that and maybe I'll do something else. And then we can get distracted. We can say to ourselves, well, I'm going to do this, and then we can get distracted and we go do something else. And later in the day we go, oh, I forgot to do what it was that I said I would do. But that does not happen in terms of the absolute. The divine knows, it knows that it knows, and immediately the law begins working upon it. So this is why we say that the divine cannot do anything against its own nature. It cannot think of things other than what it is. And if you've read my book, there's a whole chapter in there I call The Riddle of the Rock, in which the question is posed, and it's not an original question to me, it's been around for a long time, but if God can do anything, can God make a rock so big that God can't pick it up? And if you say, well, yes, God can, well, then you're saying, well, God can't pick up the rock. And if you say, no, God can't, well, then God can't do everything. And as a child, it was a great puzzle to me as to how this could be. But the answer is very simple. God cannot do anything that is not in line with its own nature. But you and I can doubt. You and I can think half-heartedly. You and I can think one way and then think the other way. And that is simply a consequence of the fact that we have been given freedom of choice and freedom of will. We have been left alone to make this great discovery. We have been left alone to discover our soul. We have been left alone to discover this power that responds to us according to our belief. And in order for the experience of this discovery to seem real to us, we had to be able to experience the consequences of our beliefs. That's how we learned. If you turn on a burner of the stove and you go over and you put your hand directly on that burner, it's going to be hot. You're going to pull your hand away quickly. Now the stove is not punishing you, nor is the law of electricity punishing you. But what has happened is you made a choice. You made a choice to put your hand on the hot stove. And the consequence of that was you got to experience the heat. So we're all the time making decisions, and we're all the time getting feedback from those decisions, and we're learning how to make better decisions as we go through life. So if we look in terms of the absolute and in terms of the divine, there can be no limitation because there's nothing to limit God, right? Omnipotence, all powerful, there can be nothing to limit God. Omniscience, it knows all that there is to know. So there is nothing to limit God. There is nothing that could possibly constrain it. Whatever God can think to do or wishes to do or declares or speaks its word, however you want to think about it, whatever the mind of God chooses to experience, it experiences. Nothing can stop it. Emma Curtis Hopkins calls it the immutableness of God. The immutableness of God. And I want you to think about that. It is immutable. There is an immutable power that has created you out of itself. And why did it create you? It created you so that it could experience itself as you, rediscovering what it is, to discover itself in some unique way as you and as I. It has created this thing we call the soul, the individualized spark of the divine that is expressing its life as us, the soul. But in order for us to be able to discover what God is, we had to kind of be emptied of that knowledge. Right? So we came from all knowledge, but in the process of becoming, we were emptied of that knowledge. The Hindus say that we have had ignorance heaped upon us. In Judeo-Christian terms, we were cast out of the garden. There was a time when we knew everything. We were walking in the cool of the evening with the divine, but we left that intimate knowledge. And we left that so that we could go forward and we could rediscover anew. But the very nature that we come from, the very nature that created us, is a nature of freedom, not a nature of bondage. It could wish no suffering for us because it could wish no suffering for itself. And these experiences that we have of lack, of limitation, of sickness, and of bondage are experiences only. And by that I mean they are not a reality. There is no power or force that is creating them other than the natural consequences of the choices that we as a human race make. So the idea that there might be a devil tempting us and trying to lead us to do things that are going to cause us to be punished by God is an old way, an old idea that we must let go of. The idea that God would punish us, or that God would test us, or that God would send us a trial or a tribulation to strengthen us, all of those ideas are old ways that we must let go of. Because the divine only knows us as it knows itself. It doesn't know that we need to learn anything. It doesn't know that we need to experience a negative consequence of anything. It simply knows that we are expressing its life and we are learning. And we are learning to greater degrees or lesser degrees. And that's all it knows, greater degrees or lesser degrees. But it can know no good, it can know no bad, it just knows that it is. So in the Eastern tradition, they say the beam of light can travel through 1,000 miles of darkness and never be affected by the darkness. And the goodness of God as us can move through all these experiences that we as human beings have without being affected by those that we call the negative ones. So the first point that we want to make is that if we have anything in our consciousness that believes that we need to be sick, that we need to be poor, that we need to suffer, we need to be punished, or all of those old ideas, we need to recognize that those are the old ways that need to be thrown off. Those are the old ways that are getting in the way of our God-given rights to life, to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then that brings us to the Declaration of Independence. So in 1776, the men who became known as the founding fathers of our country decided that they had had enough. They had had enough. It was time to do something about what they felt was the oppression of the British Crown towards the colonies, which would be called the United States of America. And what they did is very interesting, because they started with their declaration, right? Their statement. They're saying, this is what we shall have. And they started out by acknowledging God first. Now I know that you'll hear these great debates in the media about whether the nation's a Christian nation or not, and I'm not trying to insinuate one way or the other that it is or it is not. What I'm saying is that if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it talks about inalienable God-given rights. Now when we start our affirmative prayer, when we start our spiritual mind treatment, we always start by acknowledging first what God is. And the founding fathers, whether they knew it or not, were doing the same. Whether they knew that they were using what we would call a treatment or not. They were starting out by defining what God is and our relationship to God. And they said that there were certain inalienable rights amongst them, but not only, were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now we might start off by saying that there's only one life, and that life is God. And it is alive. And it is free. And it does everything that it does out of joy. It creates everything that it creates for the purpose of joy. And we would be in complete harmony with the wording of the Declaration of Independence. Now I want to make one very, very important point here, and that is that they had to start out by saying when in the course of human events it becomes necessary. In other words, that they had had it. They had tried every different way that they could think of to negotiate and reason with this king. And nothing was working. And now they were fed up, right? The old movie network. They were mad as hell and they weren't going to take it anymore. Now we tend to do this as human beings. We tend to allow ourselves to get kind of drawn in deeper and deeper and deeper into a situation. It's almost like the example we used to use in business about if you put a frog in a pan of water and you slowly raise the heat, the frog doesn't seem to notice it, but if you drop the frog into a pan of hot water, it would immediately jump out. It seems like we allow ourselves to be drawn in unconsciously to a situation where it just gets worse and it gets worse and it gets worse and it gets worse, and finally we have had enough. And then at that point in time we decide, this is not my nature, this is not the way that it's supposed to be, this is not the way I want to live, And now I'm going to do something about it. Now I'm going to turn to God. Now I'm going to use my spiritual practice as I've been taught to direct that power of the universe that responds to me according to my belief, to make whatever change or changes as needs must be in my consciousness, in my circumstances, and to move me into a place that I belong. Kind of the prodigal son becoming aware and deciding to get out of the pig pen and go to a better place. But if we would take time daily to make our declaration of that which we wish to experience in life, then perhaps we wouldn't get into a situation that we needed to be fed up with, that we needed to get angry about, that we needed to tell ourselves now is the time that I'm going to do something. Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us this very plainly in her book. She says, don't go around bragging about how you got yourself into trouble and then you got yourself out by using the power of positive prayer, by using spiritual mind treatment. She said, if you were so smart, you wouldn't have got yourself in trouble in the first place. A very plain speaker and very true. So my point is this. We go through life and we have the same inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All of God is for us and none of God is against us. If the thing that we are choosing, as Dr. Holmes tells us, if the thing that we are choosing gives a greater expression to life, to love, to truth, and to happiness, if it tries to harm no one and if it tries to take nothing away from another, then it is good. That's the only kind of moral guideline he gave us. Does it allow for a greater expression of life and of love and of truth and of beauty? Any one of those is enough. Does it try to take anything away from another? Does it try to harm another? And if we're not trying to rob or harm another, and we're trying by whatever it is that we wish in our lives to bring a greater expression of life or love or truth or beauty, then it's good. Then all of God is for us and none of God is against us. Now we can choose things that don't fit those guidelines. We can choose them. Now we have the freedom to choose. We have free will. Now we can choose them. And the law will go to work to bring them about for us, but we must be prepared that life is a game of boomerangs. That if you cast your bread upon the waters, it shall return unto you. Or as Isaiah said, my word shall not return unto me void. If we choose to put our hand down on the hot burner of the stove, we'll get burned. And if we choose to use the power, the law of mind, the power that responds to us according to our belief, for example, in a manner that is driven by a belief in lack, that is, we try to take from another because we don't believe there's enough to go around, there's not enough for me unless I take from another, or I'm not willing to do my spiritual practice, to do the mental work, as Emmett Fox would say, to create the mental equivalent in order to give the law the opportunity to bring into my circumstances that which I desire. So if I'm acting out of a belief in lack and limitation, and if I'm trying to hurt another, then I will bring those consequences unto myself. In other words, I will get to experience the consequences of a belief of lack and of limitation, and a belief of it's okay to take from another. Perhaps people will come and take from me. So what we want to do is we want to stop doing things that bring ourselves pain and suffering. Right? In Buddhism, in the Four Noble Truths, the first one is suffering exists. Suffering is part of the human condition. It's not necessary. And stop doing the things that cause yourself suffering. And then go in and eliminate the cause of your behavior to do those things that eliminate suffering. So what we would say is that you are completely free to choose, and there's a power in the universe that will support you no matter what your choice is. But eventually you will learn that you must choose wisely. You must choose wisely, otherwise you will get to experience the unpleasant consequences associated with your choice. Now we come to realize that everything that we believe is not known to us. Right? There are things that we believe that take place at a level below our conscious awareness. And perhaps subliminal is the best word that I can use to describe that. It's there, but we are not aware that it's there. And it's not unconscious, it's conscious, but it's at a level of consciousness below our level of awareness. Right? I hope you understand what I mean. There's a level of consciousness below our level of awareness. Things go on that we're not aware of at our conscious level, but yet they take place in our consciousness. You're sound asleep and you're not conscious of what's going on around you, yet if there's a noise in the house, you get up. You are aware of the noise, okay, at some level below your conscious level. When it became important, that part of you woke you up, said, hey, go look at that. And so there's stuff going on that maybe psychology would call it the unconscious, but I would call it subliminal. So we recognize that this law is operating on our collective belief, the collective unconscious, that part of us that believes in the collective unconscious. If we believe in sickness as a human race, if we believe in lack as a human race, if we believe in the necessity of pain and suffering as a human race, even though we haven't consciously gotten out of bed in the morning and saying to ourselves, yes, today is the day that I believe in lack. None of us in our right minds would do that. But as Don Miguel tells us, what we don't object to, we have consented to. So unless we get up in the morning and say, today is the day that I believe in enough and plenty, we may be quietly giving our consent to the race consciousness that believes in lack. And this explains why we experience unpleasant consequences of things that we can't put our finger on and say, well, I don't know that I was thinking anything along those lines. I can't think of anything that I was thinking that would account for my experience of this or that or the other. What we want to recognize is that we must make our declaration every day. We must not wait until it becomes painful, until we get in some kind of trouble, and then pray our way out of it and think, well, what a good job I did. What we want to do is we want to come to recognize that our individual declaration is something that we do on a continual basis, at least in the morning and at least in the evening. But as often as we can during the day, we want to remind ourselves there's only one life, and that life is God, and that life is perfect. And I am part of it. It has created me out of itself. It knows nothing of suffering, of limitation, and of bondage, and it could wish none of that for me. I now release and let go of the old ideas and the old ways, and I throw off the tyranny of the old beliefs that I have somehow bought into. And I declare today, here and now, that I accept my inalienable rights of life, of liberty, of the pursuit of happiness. Today I live my life like the spiritual being I know that I am. And there's one other thing that we want to consider. One other thing that the signers of the Declaration of Independence did. And that is they made a commitment. Remember, they committed their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors. And this was no idea to be taken lightly, because what they were doing, and they knew it, was they were committing treason. They knew what the penalty for putting their name on that paper was. It was death. And John Adams is quoted as saying, "I hope if we fail that they grease the rope before they hang us, so the knot slides quickly." They knew very well what it was that they were committing to, and they paid consequences. Their homes were torched when the British came through. If, for those of you still living in Wilmington, Thomas Hooper lived down there off of Masonboro Loop Road. And the British actually sent a warship into Masonboro Sound to shell his home. He wasn't there at the time, but they shelled his home as punishment for signing the Declaration of Independence. These people committed. They made a commitment, and they were willing to do what needed to be done. They were willing to have shaken loose whatever needed to be shaken loose in order for the demonstration of what they put their mind to come forward. And we have to kind of take that over into our personal life, that when we say that we want change in our lives, which is what we are saying when we do our spiritual mind treatment, when we do our affirmative prayer, what we're saying is, I want change. But many times what people do is they want change as long as they're not the ones that have to change. So if we are experiencing something that we don't want to experience, we have to be willing to let go of the cause. We have to be willing to let go of whatever beliefs we hold, either at a conscious level or a subliminal level. We have to be willing to let go of those beliefs. And sometimes we don't want to. Sometimes there's a struggle. Sometimes the old ways put up a fight, just like the British sent their troops to put up a fight. Sometimes our old ways put up a fight, and we do our treatment, and it becomes very uncomfortable. Because what is happening is the law is trying to produce the necessary change or changes in our consciousness so that the new way can make itself known. And the old way, the ego, the memory, whatever, is putting up a fight. And this is why sometimes if people are sick and we do a treatment for them to demonstrate perfect health, they get sicker. If they are suffering financial setbacks and we do a treatment for the flow of abundance in their life, they get poorer. It's called chemicalization. The old ways are putting up a struggle. And the reason the old ways are putting up a struggle is they are trying to trick us and force us back into the old ways. Right? What tends to happen to people is when they get frightened, they go back to the old ways. So the signers of the Declaration of Independence made their commitment and they stuck to it. When the British set Boston on fire, there's a story that John Hancock said, "Burn, Boston, burn," though it makes John Hancock a pauper. Burn, Boston, burn. To be willing to let go of whatever we need to let go of in order to allow the change to come through us. And then to let it unfold. As I said at the beginning, the causation that was set into motion when the Declaration of Independence was signed, it didn't stop when the Revolutionary War ended. You remember the signers declared that all men were created equal, and yet some of them held slaves. That doesn't go along with the concept of all men being created equal, and it took another 75 years or so for our country to begin to sort that out, and it took a great war, tremendous carnage and struggle, and death and loss. And we're not over it yet. It's still, in many ways, this idea of all men being equal has not fully taken root. All women being equal has not fully taken root in the consciousness of our society. And there's still struggle and there's still unfoldment You see, it's still in motion. It is still going forward. And the question is, are we committed to it? Are we, when we do our own treatment, are we committed to allowing it to unfold, even if that unfoldment is difficult? Are we committed to letting go of what we need to let go of in order for the old ways to be gone? Are we committed to staying with our spiritual practice for as long as it takes for the changes to be made in our consciousness, in all consciousness, that our demonstration may unfold? And when it comes back to the reason for the 4th of July celebration, when it comes to the Declaration of Independence for our country, is that something that some people did a long, long time ago on our behalf? Or is it something that you and I as citizens are doing or should be doing on a regular basis to just simply remind ourselves that this country is founded on the principle that all persons are created equal and endowed by their Creator with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Is that an idea that wishes a greater expression of life and of love and of truth and of beauty? I think so. Is it an idea that tries to rob from anyone or hurt anyone? I think not. Therefore, it's good. So what we want to keep in mind today is that each and every one of us, each and every day, is making a declaration of some sort, either by omission or commission. There is a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief, because it is the nature of the way that the universe works for it to do so. If we choose not to choose, we are still making a choice. And the requirement then upon us, once we awaken to this fact, is to choose wisely. That is not to wait until it gets so painful that we're fed up, but to choose wisely on a daily basis that this is the day that the Lord has made. That we rejoice and we are glad in it. That we choose today to see a little bit more of God everywhere we go, in everyone we meet, in everything that we do. That we choose a greater experience of life, of liberty, and of happiness. And that we wish this not only for ourselves, but for our countrymen. And we wish this not only for our countrymen, but for all persons everywhere. We are told that if we are to pray for ourselves without wishing the same for each and every other person, that it is a selfish prayer. That if we would wish love for ourselves, we must also wish love for another. If we wish life for ourselves, we must wish life for another. If we wish peace for ourselves, we must wish peace for another. So I invite us then, as we go forward, to make our declaration on a regular basis, not only when we're in pain and suffering and in trouble. Let's recognize that there's no power in the universe that wishes us harm, that wishes us bondage, that wishes us suffering. That the only power is the power that responds to us according to our belief. And any experiences of limitation, of bondage, of pain, and of suffering have been a natural consequence of belief. And we have the ability to change belief. We have the ability to make our declaration into that law of mind that responds to us according to our belief and knows exactly what to do to produce whatever change or changes as needs must be in consciousness for the evolution of that which we have declared. When we do our spiritual practice, when we do our treatment, let us treat not only for ourselves, but let's treat for our country. Let's treat for all persons everywhere. That there's only one life, and it is God. It is life. It is liberty. It is joy or happiness. It has created all of us out of itself, in its nature, in its image, in its likeness. And life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are our inalienable rights. We keep that in mind. We affirm it often. We commit ourselves to the idea and do not allow ourselves to be distracted. And we watch it unfold for the highest good of all concerned, for ourselves, for each other, for the world. And so it is.